Hello, and welcome into this episode of the Catholic Single and Flourishing podcast. I'm your host, Chad Etzel. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Chad_Etzel, and also at LinkedIn at Chad-Etzel. And today we begin a new episode, a new season of the podcast. Last season, I decided to speak to Catholic Christians who experienced a time of perpetual singleness. And I know this audience very well because that is a big part of my story and my journey. So if you want to check out a little bit more of my journey, feel free to look at podcast episode 20B, which was 7 insights from a single Catholic in his 30s. My goal here is to help Catholic singles, especially those who experience perpetual singleness, live their God-inspired call or their vocation today as a single person, while also preparing and paving a path for their vocation in the future. And it seems like this message has really caught on, as this certainly was the most popular season that I've ever had. And that's why I'm continuing it. As you can see, I've relabeled this podcast from 8th Day Coaching, now is called Catholic Single and Flourishing. And what I want to point out here is, number one, thank you for listening. But number two, this journey is not easy, but there are so many people who are listening to this that you're not alone. Just by the popularity, that's evidence that this is the case. You're not alone in this journey. So thank you once again for listening. I think many of us who have experienced this time of perpetual singleness, we want to be married. But as I have discovered in doing my research, there are practical ways to make this happen. And I want to continue to share these practical strategies, which is why, again, I'm renewing this concept of Catholic Single and Flourishing with this new episode in this new season. But beyond the practical steps in moving towards marriage during your single years, my research has also shown me that many of us who are single are seeking a purpose. And that's why a vocation is so important to us. Really being in that vocation today is because that vocation means purpose to us. At the same time, though, God is calling us to purpose and meaning right now, right here and right now. So I want to encourage us to remember that. And that's why this podcast exists, is to help us live our vocation, our purpose now, while also preparing for that permanent vocation in the future. I'm going to be continuing to bring you high-level guests that can speak to this, and especially speak to the practicals of what we can do as singles in moving towards the desired vocation that we have. But in addition to that, I'm going to be continuing to do solo episodes, kind of like what we're doing now. And in these solo episodes, what I'm actually going to be doing is reviewing life-changing books. These books were very transformative for me. And I don't want you to tune out. I want you to really give this a chance. I know book reviews are not super exciting, but at the same time, they were so transformative for me. They were so life-changing for me that I really believe if you listen to this, it's also going to continue to be life-changing for you as well. And these books that I'm discussing, they're not just going to be about dating. They're going to be about books that give you a sense of mission and purpose in your life. The first book that I'm going to be talking about, and I'm going to be talking about it today, is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It is one of my favorite books of all time, both in personal and professional development. And it's written by a man named Stephen Covey. Now, obviously, this is not a book on dating, but it is very applicable to dating, because I truly believe that if every single Catholic, or every Catholic single for that matter, reads this book, it would change not only their lives, but it would change the world. I start with this book because it teaches principles that are really fundamental for being human, for having friendships, for having strong dating relationships, for having strong marriages and having strong families. And you'll see that in a second as we get into some of the habits here, that really, in order to have a successful society or a healthy society, we have to have strong marriages. And to have strong marriages, we need to have virtuous marriages and virtuous individuals within the marriages. And that's why cultural change, society, starts with me. It starts with you. It starts with individuals building healthy habits, building virtuous habits. So today's episode, I'm going to be not going through all 7 habits. I'm going to be going through 3 out of the 7 habits and just giving you a brief flyover. I'm going to share with you some of the most relevant and impactful moments of the book, especially as it applies to those of us who are single and experiencing this time of perpetual singleness. The first habit that I'm going to talk about is habit number 1. It's be proactive. Now, I know when we hear about the word proactive, a lot of times we think about it's like taking initiative. But really, how Stephen Covey talks about it, the author, it goes a lot deeper than that. And this is what he says. He says, proactivity means more than merely taking initiative. It means that as human beings, we're responsible for our own lives. Okay, what does that mean? Number one, yes, we're responsible for the actions that we take. And we take ownership over even the consequences or the results that come out of our actions. That's what it means to be human and what it means to be proactive. But beyond that, what it also means is that we're responsible for how we go about and experience the world. Now, what does that mean? How can we go and experience the world? How do we change how we feel? Well, he uses this example from Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl wrote this book called Man's Search for Meaning, and he details out his story. Stephen Covey goes into Viktor Frankl's example. What he says is Viktor Frankl got put into the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. He and his family got put into the concentration camps. And Viktor Frankl, who was already a psychologist, started looking around and started thinking, well, who's going to survive this? And initially, he thought it was the people who looked physically strong, who were going to outlive those who looked physically weak. And as time went on, he was surprised. And he reflected on this after he got out of the concentration camps and he reflected on his experience. What he noticed is that the people who outlived the others were not those who were physically strong. It was the people who had meaning and purpose to live. Those were the people who survived. And he concluded in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, by saying this: everything can be taken away from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms. To choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. The last of the human freedoms is attitude. Somebody being able to choose how they view a certain situation. We are not determined by our life circumstances. Yes, things happen to us, but most of life is not simply what happens to us, but how do we respond? Because we can't choose what happens to us, but we can choose how we respond to certain situations. And I think that's very applicable for us as singles. Many of us who have been perpetually single probably have faced a lot of rejection, except for me, of course. You know, I'm immune to rejection. No, of course, I'm kidding. Here I am as single. I've faced plenty and plenty of rejection. But it's how we respond to that rejection. It's the attitude that we take towards that rejection. Do I see it as I'm a failure? All right, that's an attitude that I can have towards rejection. Or do I see it as God is shaping me? God is trying to teach me a lesson here. And it's very difficult to see it in that time of we really built it up. This girl that I was really interested in said no to going out on a date. And I feel crushed by that. In that moment, it's very hard to see the big picture. But God is doing something in our lives that over time, we can look back at that and understand that He was building us up in resilience, let's say. He was building us up in how do we become more at peace with who God has created us to be. And within that, what He's doing is He's building us up in being able to give and become much more self-sacrificial because we have built that fortitude within our hearts in facing rejection. And I'm, of course, just using that as an example, but facing that rejection over and over again. That's what it means to be proactive. That's one of the things that we can be doing as single people today, building up that habit, building up that virtue of choosing our attitude on a day in and day out basis. All right, moving on from habit one, I'm going to move on to habit two. He talks about begin with the end in mind. This is habit number two, is begin with the end in mind. What I want you to do right now, wherever you are, go ahead and close your eyes. Unless you're driving on the road, don't do that. But close your eyes. And I want you to call to mind an image or a scene 3 years from now. 3 years of what you want your life to be like 3 years from now. Who is in that scene? Who is around you? And go ahead and open your eyes right now. I know I didn't do that for very long, but usually with clients, what I do is really dive into that for several minutes, allowing them to create that picture. Stephen Covey does some of this in his book, and he actually has you imagine your funeral. But I think for us as singles, a lot of times that's a little bit too remote because we don't know who our loved ones are. It's a lot harder to imagine that. But to really think about 3 years from now, just using that as the quote, and just what does that look like? What do you want? What is that desire that God has put on your heart? What does that look like 3 years from now? What he says, what Covey says in the book is to begin with the end in mind means to start with a clear understanding of your destination. If you can see 3 years from now, that's the direction that I'm going to go. It allows for other things to come into play. He continues by saying, it means to know where you're going so that you have a better understanding where you are now, so that the steps you take are always in the right direction. Essentially, what he's saying is if you know what 3 years from now looks like, you can see where you are today relative to 3 years from now. And because you see the gap, you can clearly see those steps that get you there. That's what the beauty of beginning with the end in mind helps with, is because you see where you're trying to go. And because of that, you can see the steps that you can go to take you there. I think a lot of us as singles, a lot of times maybe just kind of waiting. We may be in this passive mode, especially waiting for our vocation. I think sometimes that results from a lack of clarity. We don't really know what 3 years is going to look like for us. And naturally, there is a truth to God being able to bring your vocation along. But we're also not meant to just be in this passive position. Because if we have that absolute clarity, we know where we're trying to go, we can also start filling in the gaps of what are the things that I'm not doing right now that I could be doing to get me on that path. Ultimately, what that does is it gives us more clarity and purpose. It moves us in a direction that we can take steps towards whatever that is. Say, for instance, if we do feel called to marriage, what are those practical steps we can take along the way to get there? Covey continues here. He says, it's incredibly easy to get caught up in an activity trap, in the busyness of life, to work harder and harder at climbing the ladder of success, only to discover it's leaning against the wrong wall. It's possible to be busy, very busy, without being very effective. Okay, think about that. It's easy to be busy in life, climbing the ladder of success, only to realize it's on the wrong wall. I think a lot of times we as singles, everything is very clear at work. You know, I need to do this and this and this to get that next promotion. And I need to save this amount of money in order to buy the home. And it's very clear what the path of success looks like in that area of our life. But maybe not so much in our dating life or where we want to go with our vocation of marriage, that it's just so easy for us to put our attention and our efforts into, say, something like work or something in our lives there. The busyness of our day-to-day life actually distracts us from even really dreaming about or praying about or thinking about those things that are actually most important, which for many of us might be a call to marriage. So that's really what this habit is doing, is it allows for us to gain clarity, to recognize what is actually important to me, what is important to God for my life. So we need to carve out that time to really think about mission, think about purpose. Otherwise, we continue to wander aimlessly. Now, in this chapter, Covey goes on to tell the mission or the reader to develop a personal mission statement. I have found mission statements are very, very helpful with clients that I work with. It's helpful in my life, being able to put things out on paper, because then I can decide, hey, this item on my list of to-dos is much more important than this item, because I have this mission statement that's helping me calibrate, helping me know what is most important. But beyond just words of the mission statement, I've also found it very helpful to have images or pictures. One of the people that I was working with in coaching one time just needed an image of St. Joseph, because that reminded him of the man that he was meant to be, that he is called to be. And that helped him connect with his mission. So it could be a variety of things, but the whole point is, how is God calling you? What is the purpose that he has for you? in living out your mission today. So that's habit number 2, is begin with the end in mind. Habit number 3, or actually this is habit number 5, but this is the third one that I'm talking about. It is seek first to understand, then to be understood. So seek first to understand, then be understood. I want you to think about, say, an argument or a conflict. It might have been actually verbal, or maybe it was just something that was going through your mind, whatever it was. And I want you to think about, maybe it was a conversation or an interaction that you had with a family member, a friend, a coworker, whatever it was. What was the argument about? And what was your position when it came to that argument, that you were probably at odds with somebody? And I want you to think about that situation as they were explaining their side of the story, or their argument, or the direction that they wanted to go. As they were saying that, I want you to be honest. What were you thinking about when they were talking? All right, it's a very normal and a very natural thing for us to be thinking about what we wanted to say or what we wanted to respond, and to be thinking about what this person is saying is completely wrong or completely untrue. Now, within this habit, what it does is it gives a different paradigm. Really, I think in our world today, and I think I've made this point on the podcast before, we're never actually taught to listen. In school, in the education system, we're taught how to read, write, and sometimes public speak. But rarely are we actually taught how to authentically listen to somebody. And I think that this is a huge overlook, and it causes a lot of the world's problems today. And I think it's further exacerbated by, we have a habit of listening to podcasts and YouTube, which I encourage you to continue to do if it's me, right? But there's somebody talking into a camera or talking into a microphone, and all we do is just kind of be a passive consumer in this. We're just kind of taking things in. And that's how we're taught to communicate, because we have that as the model. Or it's TV, where maybe there's the lines are written and it's person arguing, and they just kind of have this back and forth and eventually gets resolved. But it doesn't really get to the depth or the root of what's going on all the time. Or we see presidential debates, which is political discourse, my argument versus your argument. The goal is just to hit each other over the head with as many arguments as possible in the time allowed so that we can win the argument. And so the goal becomes about winning the argument. But what Covey does is he changes that the goal here in dialogue isn't to win an argument. The goal is to see the other person, to understand the other person. He says this: the essence of empathic listening is not that you agree with somebody, it's that you fully, deeply understand that person, both emotionally as well as intellectually. In other words, entering into the other person's world, both emotionally and intellectually. Personally, I call this neutral listening. It's essentially approaching a situation from a place of neutrality. What matters is not whether I agree with this person or disagree, or whether this person is wrong, or whether this person is what this person is saying is bad. What I'm simply trying to do is enter into this person's perspective before making any sort of conclusion on whether I agree with this person or not. And this is very hard to do because we're trained to think about, how do I respond to this person's argument? One example that I want to give, it's like, we don't need to agree with somebody initially. We just need to see their point of view. This example that I want to use is completely made up, but it illustrates the point. Imagine I'm hosting a game night, and I thought about inviting my roommate, but just didn't because I thought he had something going on. And usually he declines these sorts of things because it's not the same group of friends that he typically likes to hang out with. He comes in the middle of the game night, kind of looks over with disgust, goes into his room, closes the door. Game night resumes, whatever. And then game night wraps up, people go home. And then somehow we get onto the topic. And he said, I felt really left out when you didn't let me know that you were having people over and having a game night. Now, I can choose to respond in a couple of different ways. One, I already have this story about this roommate where I thought he was doing something and that was going to take him out of it. And he also doesn't even want to come. And I could lead with that, with, oh, you don't even come to these things anyway. You usually just disregard this invite. But instead of doing that, the truly empathic way, the truly active listening way, is to respond by saying something like, it makes sense that you would feel this way. It makes sense that you would feel left out. What that does is I'm entering into his world, especially emotionally, to try to understand where he's coming from. And notice how I haven't necessarily agreed with his perspective, but I've simply built that bridge and I've connected with him emotionally. When we connect with other people, emotionally and intellectually, it does a couple of things for us. Number one, sometimes the person really just needs to be heard. He could have been angry or he could have been frustrated because of something else that was going on. And this anger and frustration that he was unleashing was a cover for the difficulties that he had had throughout the day. So I can be able to enter into his perspective and learn from him. And I think another thing that comes with that is a lot of times with these emotions that are more disempowering, they feel maybe negative towards us. They oftentimes we don't like to feel those emotions. And what we do is we often feel maybe guilt towards having those emotions. And we resist those emotions. We actually feel the guilt of having those emotions rather than the emotions themselves. So what happens is when you empathize with somebody and you actually listen to what somebody's experiencing, it allows them to release those emotions and helps them move on. But secondly, what it does is it allows us to create a bridge with that person. And when we create that bridge with that person, it allows us to be able to share our perspective as well. That's really important, is being able to connect with somebody emotionally. First, seek to be to understand, and then second, then you can seek to be understood. And I personally believe that this is the number one communication skill that it would change the world if everybody practiced. The challenge, of course, is getting there. But I really believe that, especially for those of us who are single, this is a great time to practice building this sort of skill of listening. One, with our coworkers, two, with our roommates in our living situations. Because ultimately, what that does is it practices and builds a foundation for being able to enter into constructive communication if we are called and we do enter into marriage. So, this is a key point. Seek first to understand and then be understood. Okay, I'm going to wrap up this episode here. And these are only 3 of the 7 habits that I touched on. I encourage you to check out the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I've barely scratched the surface for these 3 habits that I've covered. So check out that book. And not only just read with the goal of finishing the book, don't read with the goal of finishing the book, read with the goal of mastering the content here. I think a lot of times it's like, oh, I want to read this book so I can check the box. No, really go into this and master the content, because that's what's going to change your life. Even if it's one book for a whole year, 12 months, I'm just going to master this book. I want to encourage you to consider that. As I review these books, what I'm doing here is I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. It's what Peter Kreeft says. He's a philosopher, great Catholic philosopher, and he talks about standing on the shoulders of giants. There's so much content out there. I'm not here to just like create brand new content. I repackage it in a way that is personal to me, but I think that there's so much good stuff out there from decades and, of course, beyond decades, centuries, all back to the time of Christ and even before him, of so many great life lessons that are so important for us to learn. And that's why I'm doing these reviews of books, even though it's not maybe not the most exciting sounding. There's valuable lessons that we can always learn from. So for those of us who are experiencing this time of perpetual singleness, as I mentioned before, just as Covey highlights in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, what we really want is mission. What we really want is purpose. And that's why I've created a couple of programs, a couple of brand new programs for you. Number one, I'm going to talk about my signature coaching program. I do 10 coaching sessions, 101 live coaching with you. It's not some program that you pay for and it's an online course that you just kind of forget about, but it's actual one-on-one interaction with me. And the goals of this program is, number one, to help you choose confidence. I talked about attitude, be proactive, choosing your attitude. I want to help you choose confidence in what it is that you're trying to do in your life. Number two, I want to help you identify God's call and God's mission for you today and also prepare that way for your vocation in the future. And number three, I want to help you become a highly effective Catholic dater. I mentioned a little bit about communication skills. That's maybe one topic that we can discuss, but also more of the dating do's and don'ts and how do I approach a certain situation. Those are the sorts of things that we uncover in the signature coaching program. So that's like 10 live sessions you get with me. So that's one option there. You can check that out at csfcoaching.com and look for the signature coaching program. Another option, it's a 90-minute session. So instead of 10 coaching sessions, which is a big time commitment and a big money investment, this one is just a 90-minute strategy session for a limited time. I'm making an offer. It'll be on my website. And for $150, it's not going to remain that way. So if you're listening to this way in the future, it may not be $150. But really, the goal with this session is to help you assess your attitude, the attitude that you're bringing into your day to day life, and be able to make changes if you want to have more empowering attitudes. That way you can have a strategy on getting towards your God inspired vocation. And then finally, I've mentioned it before, I have a free ebook on overcoming the cycle of pressure and inaction. What you get with that is in exchange for your email, you get this ebook where you have exercises that you can go through to help you wherever you are right now. Again, that's completely free, and you get more free content from me from emails. And I want to encourage you as we wrap up here, follow us on social media, follow me on social media, Chad underscore Etzel, ETZEL. That's on Twitter and Instagram. And I also want to invite you to follow me on LinkedIn as Chad-Etzel, so slightly a little bit different, ETZEL there. With that, just recapping what we covered, the 3 habits today. Number 1 is be proactive. Number 2, begin with the end in mind. And number 3, seek first to understand and then be understood. These habits are so important. These habits are so key to living the God inspired life. Be inspired. Live God inspired.